That moment still haunts me, playing over and over in my head like a broken record, and no matter how hard I try, I can't shake it. Lila had stepped away to use the restroom, leaving her phone behind, sitting on the table next to her glass of wine that was barely touched. My stomach had been in knots for hours, that gnawing, sickening feeling that something wasn't right. My gut was screaming at me, telling me something was off, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I kept my eyes locked on them all night, Caleb leaning in a little too close when she spoke, his hand lingering on her back for just a moment too long. I was on edge, every muscle in my body tense, gripping my glass of scotch like it was the only thing keeping me grounded, so tight I thought it might shatter in my hand. They acted like nobody was watching, but I saw everything, every little thing. So when Lila stepped away, I did something I never thought I would. I reached for her phone. My hands were shaking. Yeah, me, the guy who handles legal cases, calm and collected in the face of stress. And here I was, trembling like a high school kid on his first date. I didn't even know what I was expecting to find. A part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything at all, that I'd look like a paranoid fool. I could laugh it off later and tell myself I was just being ridiculous. But deep down, I already knew. I could feel it in my bones. I unlocked her phone. Yeah, I knew the passcode. We were married, for God's sake. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scrolled through her messages, trying to make sense of the words. Most of it was just random chit-chat, work stuff, some messages from friends. But with every message, my breath grew shorter, and my eyes raced over the screen, hoping for nothing, praying that I wouldn't find what I feared. And then there it was, a message from Caleb, of all people. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Can't wait to see you tonight, with a winking emoji. That's it. 7 words. 7 words that flipped my world upside down. Could be a harmless message, right? Something you'd say to a friend. But that damn wink. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't innocent. I could feel the weight behind it. There was something more to it. Something they were both trying to hide. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen, frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. I kept scrolling, desperate to find something that would make it all seem like nothing, like I was just overreacting. But the more I read, the worse it got. It wasn't obvious. They weren't stupid enough to send anything too explicit, but there was a subtle undertone, a layer beneath the surface. Inside jokes, little flirty remarks that only they could understand. Things like, "Remember last time?" Winky face, and "I hope we find a better spot tonight." You didn't have to be a genius to figure out what they were really saying. I just sat there, staring at the phone, feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling away. Everything I thought I knew, about my life, about my marriage, was falling apart, and I couldn't stop it. You know that feeling in movies when everything slows down, and the main character feels like they're outside their own body? That's exactly how it felt. My whole world was coming apart in slow motion, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I must have read that message over and over again, trying to process what it meant. My heart was racing, my hands slick with sweat. The noise of the party around me started to fade, and for a moment, I thought about putting the phone down and pretending I hadn't seen anything. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding, right? Maybe I was just being paranoid. But that gnawing feeling in my stomach told me I was wrong. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal, raw and brutal. And I was standing on the edge, about to fall. Lila came back from the restroom, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She smiled, asked if I wanted another drink, acting like everything was perfectly fine. She had no clue that the lie she'd been living was about to come crashing down. I quickly shoved her phone back onto the table before she could catch me, trying to act casual. But inside, I was a wreck, about to snap. I managed a stiff smile, nodded, but my throat felt like it was closing up. My mind screamed at me to do something, say something, but I couldn't. Not yet. That's when I knew for sure, without a doubt, that our marriage was hanging by a thread, and I had no idea how to fix it. Hell, at that point, I wasn't even sure I wanted to. I sat there, my heart thudding in my chest, watching her, knowing that from that moment on, things would never be the same. I needed more proof. As much as that stupid message clawed at me, part of me still wished I was wrong. Maybe I was just letting my imagination run wild. Maybe I was just paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I knew what I was seeing. I just wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. I had to see more to be completely certain. Because if I was going to confront Lila, if I was going to tear everything apart, I couldn't afford to be wrong. So one evening, when she said she had to work late, I made a decision. I was going to follow her. Yeah, I know. It sounds like something out of a cheesy detective movie, right? But desperate times call for desperate measures. She'd been telling me for weeks about working late at the office, big projects, client meetings, everything. I'd swallowed it all, trying to be the understanding husband, the one who trusts his wife. But that night, I wasn't buying it anymore. I waited until she left, her heels clicking confidently down the driveway, her perfume hanging in the air like poison. I gave her a few minutes to get ahead before grabbing my keys and slipping out. My heart was racing as I followed at a safe distance, making sure she wouldn't see me. And sure enough, she wasn't heading to the office. That much was clear. Instead, she drove toward the city center, and that set off all kinds of alarms in my head. Why would she be going downtown for work? After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel. You know the kind I mean. Cheap, quiet, tucked away from the main road. The kind of place people go when they want to disappear for a little while. My stomach dropped as I parked a little farther down the street, just far enough to keep an eye on her, but out of sight. I watched as she stepped out of the car, casually scanning the surroundings, almost like she was making sure no one was watching. And then, just as I feared, he showed up. Caleb, my best friend, walking toward her like he didn't have a care in the world, like he wasn't about to meet my wife at some shady hotel. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, and my heart was pounding in my ears as I watched the scene unfold in front of me, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. They didn't hesitate. As soon as Caleb reached her, he slipped his arm around her waist like it was second nature. He pulled her close, and without a second thought, he kissed her. Not a quick, guilty peck, but a slow, deliberate kiss, one that screamed familiarity. The way they moved together, the way their bodies seemed to fit so perfectly, it was clear this wasn't the first time. No way. I sat there, paralyzed, watching the woman I loved fall into the arms of my best friend, my fucking brother. They stood there, oblivious to me, lost in each other for what felt like forever, unaware that I was just yards away, watching every move. It was beyond humiliating. I felt like a complete fool. Like every memory, every moment I had cherished was a lie. And here I was, the idiot who never saw it coming. The pain, it felt like a physical weight, like someone was choking me with every breath. But underneath that pain, something darker was rising. Something much worse. I was angry. No, not just angry, furious. But even as I watched them, smiling and talking, walking toward the hotel entrance without a care in the world, I stayed calm. I didn't lash out. Couldn't. Not yet. I wanted to march out of the car, confront them right there, scream at them, punch Caleb in his smug face, and drag Lila out by her hair. But I knew better than that. No, that wouldn't have been satisfying for them. It would have been too easy. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. So I stayed in the car, seething with rage, every inch of me trembling. But I had a plan. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who gets cheated on and just accepts it. No way. I was going to make sure they paid for what they did. But I needed time. I needed to think. I needed to plan. So instead of confronting them, I stayed put, watching them disappear into the hotel, knowing exactly what was going down behind those doors. And as much as it killed me, I started the car and drove off. My revenge was already beginning to form in my mind. I knew this wouldn't be some quick, easy payoff. Revenge isn't something you rush. I had to be strategic about it. I needed to gather everything, every piece of the puzzle before I made my move. So I became their shadow, always watching, always one step behind, but never letting them know I was there. I started recording their phone calls, Lila had become predictable, taking her work calls outside whenever she thought I wasn't around. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a tracking program on her phone, something I got from a tech-savvy client, that allowed me to listen in on all her conversations. I started following her on those nights when she claimed to be working late, watching her meet Caleb at one of their usual spots. With each new piece of evidence, my anger grew. But I didn't let it consume me. Not yet. I didn't want to just expose them, that would be too easy. Sure, I could have gone public and caused a scandal, but eventually, they'd brush it off. They'd find a way to bury it, move on. No, I wanted them to feel what I was feeling. The humiliation, the betrayal, that gut-wrenching pain that eats away at you from the inside. They needed to suffer, and I was going to make sure of it. Then, one day I got a call. Zoe, Maxwell's wife. It had been weeks since we'd last talked. Zoe and Maxwell always seemed like the perfect couple, at least from the outside. If I was blindsided by Lila's betrayal, I couldn't even imagine the hell Zoe was living through. But when she called, her voice was eerily calm. At first, I didn't think much of it. She asked how I was doing, made small talk. Nothing out of the ordinary. But there was something in her voice, something hesitant, like she was struggling to ask a question without saying it outright. After a long pause, she finally asked, "Nathan, I need to know something. Do you think Maxwell might be seeing someone?" Her voice cracked just a little, enough to send a shiver down my spine. How the hell was I supposed to answer that? She probably just started suspecting something, but I already knew the whole story. I couldn't just dump everything on her over the phone. So, I stayed silent for a moment, trying to figure out the right way to respond. She kept talking, like the silence gave her permission to keep spilling her doubts. She told me how Maxwell had been working late more often, how distant he'd become, distracted. She was starting to wonder if there was someone else. But she didn't want to jump to conclusions. She didn't want to be that wife, the one who assumes the worst without proof. But now, everything was starting to add up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wanted to tell her the truth right there. Tell her everything. Your husband is cheating, and he's doing it with my wife. But something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I didn't want to hear the devastation in her voice when she realized what was happening. The way the truth would hit her, just like it hit me. I just stayed quiet and listened as Zoe poured out everything she suspected. All her worries and doubts. Everything she had been keeping inside. It was like she had been holding her breath for weeks, waiting for someone to hear her. And then she asked me the question that made my heart sink. "Nathan," she said softly, almost in a whisper, "do you think Maxwell's seeing someone?" Her words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. And I knew right then I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. I'd kept this secret for far too long, and it was eating me alive. So I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me on the other end of the line, I could feel the weight in my chest as I spoke. "Yeah, Zoe, I do." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her mind working, the pieces coming together. But instead of falling apart, like I expected, she was silent for a moment. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "Let's meet." The next day we met at a quiet cafe, the kind where no one cares who's sitting at the table next to you. I got there first, and when she walked in, I barely recognized her. Zoe had always been the picture of composure, but now, she looked completely different, like something had drained the life out of her. She sat down across from me, her gaze downcast, nervously stirring her coffee, as if the answers she needed were somehow buried in the cup. Neither of us knew how to start, so we just sat there, the silence between us thick with tension. It felt like the kind of silence you can't fill, the kind that settles heavy in the air. Finally, Zoe broke it, her voice soft but heavy with emotion. "He's been different, Nathan. Coming home late, making up excuses. It's like he's a ghost in our house. And I'm just left wondering if he's even really there anymore." I could feel the weight of her words in my chest, and I sat there gripping the edge of the table, unsure of what to say. How do you tell someone that their whole world is about to fall apart? I wanted to shield her from the truth, to somehow protect her from the pain I knew was coming. But I couldn't lie anymore. When she looked at me, searching my face for answers, she asked, Do you think he's seeing someone? I could feel it all building up, that terrible truth, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. I think he is, I said, my voice trembling slightly, and I think it's with Lila. The change in her face was immediate. The sadness shifted into something colder, harder. But she didn't break down. She didn't fall apart. Instead, her expression sharpened, and I saw a new resolve in her eyes. I hadn't expected that. She leaned forward, her voice low but steady. Then let's make them pay. Her words hit me like a slap, but they also ignited something in me. This wasn't about seeking sympathy anymore. We weren't just victims here. She wanted revenge, and for the first time since all of this started, I realized I wasn't alone in this. We were in it together. In that moment, we weren't just two people crushed by betrayal. We were partners bound by the same hurt, and we were going to take back control. I nodded, already plotting in my head, my mind clearing. We were going to make Maxwell and Lila regret every second of this. From that day on, Zoe and I met up more often. At first, it was all about planning, making sure we had everything we needed to catch them in the act. But as time went on, something else started to grow between us. Something unspoken. We were both broken, shattered by the lies of the people we thought we could trust the most. And in that shared pain, we found a silent understanding. She got it. She understood the hurt in a way no one else could. We spent hours talking, venting, and planning. She'd vent about Maxwell, and I'd rage about Lila. But even as we shared our pain, there was something else. Something electric between us. A tension that simmered just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to break. One night, Zoe came over to my place. It was becoming our routine dinners, late-night talks, scheming. But that night, something felt different. I cooked a simple dinner, but I couldn't focus on the food. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, charged, like the calm before a storm. We talked about our spouses, about how we'd make them pay, about how we'd expose them. But beneath all the words, there was an unspoken something hanging in the air. She looked stunning that night. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes that had once been clouded with pain, seemed to shimmer with something fierce, something untamed. She wore a simple black dress, nothing too fancy, but it hugged her figure in a way that made it hard to look away. I tried to focus on our conversation, on the plan, but my mind kept slipping. My attention kept drifting to the curve of her neck, the way her lips moved when she spoke. After dinner, we didn't rush to leave. We stayed at the table, the silence between us now full of anticipation, no longer uncomfortable, but charged, like something was about to happen. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I finally looked up, our gazes locked. In that instant, everything else seemed to disappear. All I could see was her. Nathan. She whispered, her voice barely a breath. We're just as much cheaters as they are. The words hit me hard, and in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about punishing them. She wasn't angry at just her husband. We were both caught in the same storm, both drowning in betrayal. But before I could say anything, she continued, her hand reaching for my shoulder, her touch sending a shock through me. I can't keep pretending. I can't keep this inside anymore. Her hand lingered, warm and electric, and I felt a pull, a deep urge to move closer. We both knew what was happening. We both knew what we were about to do. A small part of me fought it. A part of me wanted to pull away, to stop before it went too far. But the rest of me, the part that had been buried under pain and betrayal for so long, was drawing me closer to her. In that moment, she was the only one who truly understood. I leaned in, our faces just inches apart, and before I could stop myself, our lips collided. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was raw, desperate, like we were both trying to fill the emptiness inside each other. Her lips were soft, and her breath was unsteady. As I pulled her closer, I felt the tension in her body melt away. There was no turning back now. We didn't stop. I grabbed her waist, pulling her onto my lap, and she responded immediately, her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, needing more. We stumbled toward the couch, our bodies entangled in a frantic, desperate rush. It wasn't just about the act itself. It was a chaotic release of everything we'd been holding in. Our pain, our anger, our shattered trust. It felt like we were both trying to escape the wreckage of our lives, desperately grasping at something, anything, that might bring us some form of relief. Her dress slid off easily, and before I knew it, we were lost in each other, moving with a kind of urgency that shocked me. This wasn't just physical, it was about regaining something we'd lost, something that had been ripped away from us by the very people we trusted the most. The sound of her moans filled the air as we moved from the couch to the floor, and then to the bedroom and even the bathroom. Neither of us was willing to stop, unwilling to let go of the high of losing ourselves in this moment, even if it was temporary. The experience was raw, disordered, a whirlwind of emotions and need. We were two people trying to outrun the overwhelming weight of betrayal, using each other as a temporary escape from the mess our lives had become. For those few hours, nothing else mattered. I wasn't thinking about Lila or Maxwell. I wasn't consumed by revenge, nor was I haunted by the betrayal that had torn me apart. My focus was solely on Haley, her body, her warmth, the sound of her breathless moans as they echoed in my ear. But once the heat of the moment subsided, and I lay there in the quiet aftermath, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a heavy weight. Haley lay beside me, curled up against my side, asleep, but I couldn't find any peace. The truth gnawed at me, eating away at my insides. Yes, I'd betrayed Lila, but more than that, I had betrayed myself. I had crossed a line, surrendered to something I despised. I had become part of the mess I'd sworn never to be part of. I had stooped to their level, and no amount of revenge would ever make that feel right. After that night with Haley, everything changed. It wasn't just the act. It was the realization that I had gone down a path I couldn't turn back from. I had let myself become something I never imagined. The floodgates opened, and all the anger, the pain, and the confusion I'd been holding back for so long came rushing to the surface. Haley and I continued seeing each other, but now there was an undercurrent of tension, an anxiety that lingered in every conversation and meeting. We both knew the consequences, knew that this was a dangerous game we were playing, and yet we couldn't stop. The passion between us was undeniable, but so was the fear. We were walking a fine line and we both knew it. But despite everything, she was the one person who truly understood me. With Haley, I didn't have to wear the mask of the successful, in-control lawyer. She saw through all of it. And as much as we tried to stick to the plan, to expose Maxwell and Lila and get our revenge, the lines between our original goal and our growing emotions kept getting muddied. The more we met, the more the tension between us built. Our conversations were laced with guilt, and our time together was charged with a mixture of passion and something darker, something that made me uneasy. But still, we couldn't pull away. We were in too deep. Meanwhile, things with Lila were falling apart. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. The warmth, the connection we once shared had disappeared. Our conversations were stiff, mechanical, like two people just going through the motions, pretending to be in a relationship when there was nothing left. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done with the role of the clueless husband. I'd seen enough, felt enough. The blinders were off. But I wasn't going to be the one who walked away looking defeated. No. After everything I had uncovered about Lila's affair with Maxwell, I was ready to flip the script. If anyone was going to leave this with their dignity, it was going to be me. I had to act fast and decisively. It was time to play the hand I had been dealt. And then, the phone call came that shifted everything. My private investigator. After weeks of tracking them, he had delivered the one thing I needed: undeniable proof. Proof that would make everything clear. He handed me a thick envelope, photos, videos, and screenshots of their conversations. There they were, Lila and Maxwell caught in the act at that hotel. It was everything I needed to confront Lila, to bring her down in court. I wasn't about to let her get away with this. When I got that folder, I felt everything inside me change. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the chance to turn the tables, to take control. No more manipulation from Lila. This was my moment. That evening, I made preparations. I cooked dinner. Nothing elaborate, just enough to make it seem like a normal night. I poured wine, lit a few candles, and waited. I had to remain calm, had to make everything appear perfectly ordinary. When Lila came through the door, I could see the suspicion in her eyes immediately. She hesitated, as if trying to assess the situation, but then sat down and picked up her wine glass. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm, though my heart was pounding. I could see her grip tighten on her glass. She was already on edge. I kept it casual at first, not wanting her to see what was coming. I made it seem like everything was fine, that there was nothing wrong. But the moment she began with her excuses, justifying her late nights, pretending everything was still normal, that's when I pulled out the photos. One by one, I laid them on the table. Lila and Maxwell, standing too close, laughing like nothing was wrong. A picture of them holding hands outside the hotel, like a couple with no care in the world. The last photo was the final blow, a shot of them kissing outside the hotel. I watched as her face drained of color, her hands shaking as she stared at the photos. Her voice cracked when she finally whispered, "How could you do this?" The fear, the anger, it was all there in her words, but there was no remorse in her eyes. She wasn't sorry. She was just shocked that I had caught her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stared at her, cold and steady, my words cutting through the silence. "You're the one who betrayed us, Lila, not me." I let those words hang in the air for a moment, watching her process them. "I'm filing for divorce. And by the way, I've already spoken to my lawyer." That last line hit her like a ton of bricks. She had never expected me to be the one holding all the cards. For so long, she had assumed she could control the situation, manipulate it to her advantage, maybe even turn the tables on me. But now, she was realizing just how wrong she had been. I wasn't the naive husband she thought she could push around. I had the evidence, the leverage, and now the upper hand. She sat there, frozen, her eyes darting between the photos and me, trying to figure out how she could salvage the situation. But it was too late. I had already made my move, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I filed for divorce. I had the proof I needed, and I didn't hesitate to hire one of the best divorce lawyers in the city. Someone ruthless, someone who would fight for every inch of ground until I got exactly what I wanted. Our mission was clear: make sure Lila walked away with nothing. I demanded half of everything, our assets, the house, the cars, everything we had built together. But more than that, I made sure to position myself to take full financial control. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to win. Once the papers were filed, things moved faster than I anticipated. Lila, who had been so concerned about protecting her reputation, found herself scrambling. But by then, it was far too late for her to do any damage control. Word of her affair with Maxwell spread like wildfire, and the consequences were swift. Several important business contracts slipped through her fingers. Clients she had relied on for years cut ties with her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. She was drowning, and the harder she struggled, the deeper she sank. Maxwell? That smug bastard thought he could escape unscathed. But he was wrong. Zoe made sure of that. She had stayed quiet at first, letting me take the lead with Lila, but once I filed for divorce, Zoe moved in for the kill. She didn't just file her own papers. She made sure her testimony was a death blow to Maxwell's credibility. She exposed everything: the affair, his neglect, his shady business dealings. Her words tore him down, both personally and professionally. But Zoe and I weren't done yet. We had an agenda, and Maxwell never saw us coming. While he was distracted by the fallout in his personal life, I went after his business. I started striking deals with some of his key clients who could see the writing on the wall, who knew his empire was crumbling. They didn't hesitate. They switched to me, and I made sure they understood who was now in charge. Slowly, Maxwell's business started to spiral. He was losing clients, money, and facing lawsuits left and right. There was no escape for him. He thought he could walk away with his reputation intact. But Zoe and I made sure he didn't. Watching Maxwell fall apart, both personally and professionally, was a kind of satisfaction I hadn't expected. It wasn't because I wanted to see him suffer. It was because I knew that, in the end, I had come out on top. I hadn't let him or Lila break me. I had taken control of my life, and I made sure they paid for what they did. But then, a few weeks later, Zoe and I met again. This time, though, it wasn't about revenge or small victories. It was different. We had become something more than just allies in a twisted game. We had grown close, really close. Our meetings no longer had the same raw, angry passion. They were deeper now. The sex, too. It wasn't just reckless and wild. It had become emotional, intimate, as if we were building something real. Zoe understood me in ways no one else ever had. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone by my side who truly saw me. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. I walked away with the house, a significant portion of the assets, and full control over the business I had once shared with Maxwell. Lila was left with nothing. She tried to rebuild her life, but without me as her safety net, it was a struggle. Her betrayal had cost her more than just our marriage. It had cost her everything. Maxwell? Well, he wasn't doing much better. Zoe had walked away from him, and with the debts mounting and his reputation in tatters, he sank deeper into the gossip and scandal that consumed him. His life had collapsed, and there was no one left to pick up the pieces. Zoe and I, however, no longer had to hide. Our relationship went public, and we didn't care what people thought. We had survived the storm, and now we were building something real. We weren't just two broken people looking for revenge anymore. We had one, and we were ready to leave Lila and Maxwell in the dust. As I stood there, looking at everything I had gained, my freedom, my business, and my future with Zoe, I felt nothing but victory. I had played the game with cold precision, calculating every move. And the best part? I didn't regret a single decision.